Welcome to a live episode of Surviving the Survivor. We bring you the best guests in all of true crime. Don't forget to subscribe and smash that like button. Here's your host, Emmy Award-winning broadcaster, Joel Waldman.
What's up, SCS Nation, and welcome to another episode of Surviving the Survivor, the podcast that promises to bring you the very best guests in all of true crime. And today, we are achieving new heights with our panels. It is not just a tagline, it is our reality. I'm about to introduce our esteemed guests as I try to focus my camera in there, which is unfocusing on me. It's all about the Menendez brothers tonight. Real quickly, though, my apologies, because when it rains, it pours. I told you that I told the COE that if I come to Orlando, where I am, to cover the Sarah Boone trial, that all hell would break loose, and it has broken loose. And just moments ago, Tim Jansen received Charlie Adelson's appeal. So as soon as this show is over, we are going to continue on with Tim. And it's a crazy world because I am going to be on Court TV tonight at 9:30, but I have to be there at 9:20. So we're going to do this show, and then we're going to have Tim break down Charlie's appeal. And Space Coast and I just decided this, and that is the reason for the delay. Without further ado, I'm just going to introduce the guests, and we're going to hop right into it. Dr. Ann Burgess. Not much more you can say about her than she is a living legend, a friend of the show, which we are grateful for, a guest on here fairly often. She's the author of A Killer by Design. Among her many awards and accolades in 2016, the reason she's known as a legend is she was literally named a living legend by the American Academy of Nursing. She basically helped start the entire area of criminal profiling and helped the FBI along with it. And as a result, many perpetrators have been caught, and she truly understands the criminal mind. And she also was a witness for Eric Menendez at the first trial, which he's going to tell us all about today. Erlinda Johnson, she is first-time guest here on STS, but we love it. She's a highly experienced and successful criminal defense and personal injury attorney, and you might know the name because she was a special prosecutor in the Alec Baldwin case. Last but not, gotta laugh.
I remember that.
Jansen. Yeah, so
she properly withdrew, right?
Yeah,
you did. Yeah. You did the right thing. Yeah.
And then last but not least, R. Timothy Jansen, the letter R and the OUR. He's handled complex civil, administrative, and criminal litigation. First as chief trial counsel for the Secretary of State of Florida. Afterwards, he worked as a senior fraud prosecutor for the United States Attorney in Tampa. So he's a federal prosecutor and now a fine criminal defense attorney. He just got Charlie Adelson's appeal, and we're going to break it down right after this show. I've got to start with the living legend, and I know you're busier than anybody. Did you have a chance to watch this press conference this afternoon with more than 20 members of Lyle and Erik's family present in Los Angeles?
No, I did not. I was busy teaching, so I'm looking forward to hearing about it.
Well, I'll tell you what, because of that, we're going to start right here. I'm just going to play a piece of sound. This is from Anna Maria Baralt. She is the niece of Lyle and Erik. Let's listen to her. And then I've got another piece from Kitty Menendez's own sister who spoke. But let's listen to this one first. I'll hold it right there, and we'll bring it back in a few moments. But Dr. Ann, you obviously, spoke with Eric Menendez in person. You're a witness at the first trial. Do you think it's time for them to be resentenced, maybe let out of prison? And if so, why?
I do believe it is time. I think that they have served far more years than they would have had the verdict been different. The verdict was between manslaughter and first-degree murder. And in getting after the fact, getting some information about how it played out in the jury room. I think that is where we find a lot of the culture that was ongoing at that time. I think that the male, it was, to quote Hazel Thornton, who was a juror in that first trial, she said it was the battle of the sexes. And she said they spent more time arguing over that. And the name calling that went between the men and the women was amazing. She said it was just, more outrageous. So in terms of your question, I think that I would agree that if the case had come up in this current era, it would have been easily been a very different outcome. And I think that the whole idea that they had no access to parole always was a question for me of why that was put in, because even the worst of the serial killers always were given the opportunity for parole, and year after year they would come up and they can get turned down. But the idea that they never had the opportunity to even present anything before a parole board seemed very punitive to me.
That's an interesting take. I'm about to ask her, Linda, about that aspect. But Jewel Jet here, super chat for Dr. Ann Burgess. Yay, Dr. Ann, the hero, that she stood for the Menendezes before it was trendy and she could pick up on the truth. So grateful for her amazing contributions to this world. Look, I told my daughters after I saw Mastermind on Hulu, it's a docuseries about Dr. Ann Burgess, that I didn't want my daughters, they didn't have to be profilers per se, but they had to be like Ann. They had to try to do something cool and go against the grain and maybe create something unique in their own way. For example, my oldest daughter, she designs a lot of her own clothes. Told her she should become a designer, a fashion designer, and she's just 10 years old. So that's what I was getting at. But Dr. Ann, how did you know so early on, these struggles when the rest of the world was pretty much saying you're nuts? Even they don't act this way because of what happened. You said, yes, they do. How were you able to, I guess, just find your own path here?
Well, when I first heard about the facts of the case, and they were saying that this was because of money, that the greed, whatever you want, that was a prosecution's motive. These young brothers had all the money they needed. Never once did we hear anything about they didn't have access to money. So it didn't make any sense to me that that would be the reason, the motive. So after looking at all of the information, I said something's wrong in the family. It has to be something within the family. Now, what that was at that time, I didn't know. But then I would, in interviewing Eric, and I spent over 50 hours with him in the Los Angeles jail. It even made me more aware of the whole issue of abuse. Now, of course, I had been studying abuse. This was my area. And so many of the things that he was saying made sense to me. So that's where I went with that in terms of saying it was something within the family. The abuse, there was multiple types of abuse. It was not only the sexual abuse, but the psychological abuse, the control that the father had over these brothers was really incredible, if you will. I can remember talking with teachers who would tell me about them, the parents coming in to see them, arguing a grade that Eric had gotten. And I thought, that's very unusual. I've been a teacher a long time. I've never had a parent come in to argue a grade. So I certainly felt the weight, if you will, of their argument.
Yeah. Look at this from Jenny Allison. Dr. Burgess, ! The legend. What I would give to talk to her. Amazing. I'll tell you what, Jenny, next time Dr. Burgess is a guest, we'll have you co-host with me, and you can ask her some questions. So, Erlinda, to you, I mean, Ann brings up an interesting point, and someone just said Susan Smith, who is living in ignominy because she was convicted of drowning her 2 kids. She's up for a parole hearing despite getting a little bit of trouble this past week. But the Menendez brothers never, it was life without parole, LWOP, as they like to say. Why do you think that is? And I guess if it is life without parole, I guess a new sentence would obviously undercut that, correct?
Right. So I think what this comes down to is you had 2 different trials. So in preparing for today's panel, I read some of the pleadings that were filed before the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals for the on behalf of the Menendez brothers on their writ of habeas corpus to the Ninth Circuit. And it was really interesting to see the first problem where judges are supposed to be completely impartial and completely objective. I personally do not believe that's the case. We all have biases. And I think that judges also have a bias, either in favor of the prosecution or in favor of the defense. I think they try to be neutral, but I don't think that's always the case. And so you have a judge in the second trial who excluded a great deal of the defense evidence. He refused to give the defendants, Lyle and Erik, the imperfect self-defense jury instruction, which I think was a huge factor in hanging the jury the first time. So then you have a judge who was clearly, I think, just from reading the pleadings before the Ninth Circuit, in my opinion, a little bias in favor of the prosecution. And I think that was what really weighed in handing down this life without the opportunity of parole sentence. And so, because when you look at the series of rulings that the second judge made in the second trial, it's so contrary to what the first judge did. And so that's what I think. I think part of it comes down because I think he could have imposed a sentence with the opportunity of applying for parole at some point, but he chose to not do that.
We'll continue to dig into that. Tim Jansen, a bunch of the family members, including Mark Garagos, who's representing the family, they said, and we talked about this earlier, you and I, during the press conference, if it was the Menendez sisters, they would have been out a long time ago. Do you agree with that? Do you think that would be the case?
There has been a bias over in domestic violence cases, in sexual abuse cases, that men are not seen as victims, that women are seen as victims. When the police come to the house and they see a battery, they look for injuries on the female rather than the injuries on the male. And if there's injuries on both, they assume that it was the male that instigated it. So it's not surprising back in the 70s and the 80s that they did not really consider males to be victims of sexual battery, especially by the father, not in a Beverly Hills home and not in this beautiful and this successful career with a family and a wife there. So it is true. I mean, I've seen it in practice where I've had it where clients were afraid to assert the defense when they had a valid defense of abuse because they didn't want to. They'd rather take a plea and accept responsibility than to go into a court and say they were being abused.
That's interesting. Psychologically, that's interesting. And this question, but I'm going to play a little bit more of the sound before you answer it. Dr. Burgess, it's a question that everyone asks, why did they kill the mother? So let's just hold on to that question for 1 second. I'm going to play a little more. Don't worry. We don't have the 2 others, just that one. But Dr. Ann, to you, first of all, your thoughts on what you just heard from family member here. This, again, is the niece of Lyle and Erik, Anna Maria Baralt. What did you think? She speaks quite eloquently.
She certainly does. And I think that to bring together the family when this was a family situation is commendable. It really is that they've been able to put their whatever their initial feelings were about this, because they represented both sides of the family, that has certainly will give some hope to Erik and Lyle. I think that's the other thing. When you don't allow any opportunity for parole, you take away hope. And I think that we don't usually do that in this country, that we always allow some hope. It doesn't mean that they wouldn't get turned down each time like many the serial killers do, but the hope that they still have opportunity. So the family coming together, I think, is giving them the hope. I think that that's so important as they continue. Been 34 years locked up for a situation that really was not clearly understood, I think, as Mr. Jensen said at that time in the early 90s.
You see here, Linda, from Sweet and Sour Miss, and I'm sorry to hear this, Sweet and Sour Miss, but she writes, we were abused the same way by our parents. We did not ever think of killing them. My sister married at 16 to get away and ran away. Do you fear in any way, Erlinda, that this sends maybe the wrong message or sets a precedent that you can kill and get away with it if you were SA'd? We don't like to use the term, but if you were SA'd, and here's a case in point. It happened, Sweet and Sour says to herself, they did not respond by killing the parents. They left. So what kind of precedent, in your opinion, does this set?
Well, first, I'm sorry, Sweet and Sour, that you had to experience that, and your sister had to run away and get married at 16, and that's unfortunate. But I don't think necessarily this sets a bad precedent. I think that this brings issues that were hidden, and as Tim and Dr. Burgess have mentioned, these are issues that were not really discussed back in the 90s, in the 80s and 90s. These are issues that people just didn't want to bring up into the public view. I don't think that it means people will get away with it, because remember, they weren't asking to be acquitted. With the first trial, when the judge allowed the imperfect self-defense jury instruction, it would have meant that they would have been convicted of manslaughter. They would have still spent time in prison, just not the rest of their natural lives in prison, because a jury needed to decide. My view has always been, as a trial lawyer for the last 29 years, is let's let a jury decide. Let's put all the evidence before a jury and let the jury make the decision. And it's unfortunate that in the second trial, the judge excluded a lot of that evidence that was introduced during the first trial. And clearly it made some traction. It had some traction with the jury because it hung. They couldn't reach a decision. So I don't think it's going to set a bad precedent. I think it's bringing issues of SA. We have the Me Too movement as of late. We have to bring these issues to the forefront, and we have to let juries make that decision.
Well said. Tim Jansen, to you, getting into the legal process here. So again, this is the DA in Los Angeles, George Gascon, who is in jeopardy of losing his job as DA. And I got some interesting analysis from Phantom 6000, who's a friend of the show. He's a lawyer in Los Angeles, and he said it's the LA is obviously known to be very liberal, and now the liberal voting constituency, they're no longer okay with the crime that's happening in LA and the homelessness. So there's been a shift politically, and so a lot of people are accusing this guy Gascon of using this kind of as a political chip to sweep in undecided voters. I guess it's much more of a political question. I was going a different way at first, Tim, but politically speaking here, do you see it as sort of a political stunt where he's just using the Menendez brothers as leverage and somehow they'll be rewarded for it? Tim, you're muted.
You gave me two scenarios. You said that it's changing out there. They're tired of the crime, so they may not want the liberal guy letting these murderers out. So he would then probably deny the motion. But if he's an astute politician like Machiavelli, right, he'd try to get both without damaging himself. He would probably say, I'll agree to let the judge have a resentencing, knowing that the resentencing would not occur prior to the election. That's a smart politician, right? He doesn't offend anybody, and he kind of helps some and helps the others. I don't know what he's going to do, but I mean, I thought it was a very well-organized press conference today. I thought Joan was very credible. I saw her interview with the family 7 years ago, and they brought up facts clearly showing what was going on in that home was not normal. You don't have where all the family that don't even live there know you don't go down that hallway when the father's in the room with the boys. That should be the reddest flag you could ever have. And those family members should have spoke up, but they were fearful. And they probably couldn't believe that this man would do this to his own sons.
Very quick programming note. We were a little late today. That's because there's breaking news with our OG, our original true crime case, which is all about Dan Markel. In this particular instance, it is Charlie Adelson, the man convicted of killing him in a murder for hire plot. They have just filed an appeal, Charlie and his legal team. And we're going to, as soon as this show ends, keep Tim on. And I'm going to pivot to that and take your questions before I do Core TV at 9:15. When it rains, it pours. So, but just wanted to remind you of that. So to Dr. Ann from Annie K here. It's a great question. Just moving the conversation forward. How would you help SA victims to speak up considering their fear, humiliation, and their embarrassment? You want to break the cycle. How do you do it?
Well, that's one of the reasons that I think the rape crisis centers have done so much work in that area, that when there are other opportunities for victims to seek out resources and people to talk to make a decision. And we encourage them to be able, first of all, the health issues. We're always concerned about health issues, let alone the legal issues. And it is difficult for victims who've just been through a harrowing experience to have to come up quickly with a decision of reporting. So it takes more education, and it takes our rape crisis centers and our mental health people, and especially at the ER, at the emergency room, to help women and men make the right decision. Also, the fact we have to consider is what we call the delayed disclosure, that you have people that haven't come forward for years. We see that in some of the Me Too movement has drawn upon that. And so we have to be understanding of what the reasons are why people don't come forward. And you've hit some of them, certainly, and then there are others. And that has to be settled. The person has to make their own decision, but they can get some help in sorting out some of the issues.
I had the lovely pleasure of just being, I guess, bounced out. I'm at a hotel, and the Wi-Fi says it is strong, but if I disappear, Tim Jansen will take over until I get back on. He does it all, but we're good for now. So, Erlinda, to you, legally speaking, this is now a district attorney, George Gascon again, who is saying, I'm going to consider resentencing. By the way, he says he's going to do it by the end of the month, which is when the election is, coincidentally. But Erlinda, explain the legal procedure here. Tim did it earlier, but there's also this habeas corpus versus the resentencing. What happens here legally?
So essentially, from what I understand, they've exhausted all their appellate rights. They went up to all the way to the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals, the Federal Court of Appeals. Their writ of habeas corpus was rejected. The Ninth Circuit affirmed the federal district court's denial of their habeas corpus. And so basically the way I see it, and Tim, tell me what you think, but the way I see it is the only way that Lyle and Eric will be able to get some relief is by stipulation, is by agreement from the prosecution. Because under California Penal Code, I think it's 1172.1, if it's by stipulation of the parties, the defendants could be resentenced. And the court will have to essentially hold a hearing, usually within 30 days, a status conference. But yeah, I know they filed a motion for a new trial, arguing that they have discovered this new evidence. I don't think necessarily it's new evidence. It's a letter from a cousin. I think it was a Mr. Cano who testified during the first trial. I think that they would probably lose on that one, because I think it has to be new evidence that couldn't have been discovered with due diligence at the time. And I think the court would probably rule that, look, you had the witness, the cousin to whom, Eric, you wrote this letter, testified during the first trial. This is something that could have been discovered. So I think that what DA Gascon is doing is probably under California Penal Code 1172.1, saying, maybe I'll agree to a resentencing, but I think that that's probably the only way they're going to get relief.
Tim, is there anything you want to add to that from a legal perspective, by the way?
No, I think she's correct, because I think the witness testified in the first trial. I think he's deceased now.
Yeah, he died young, I think at 31.
I don't think the Menudo person came forward during the first trial, and I don't think he came forward during the second trial. I think he also would be new evidence that would be corroborating evidence that might tip the scale, because I agree. I think the first witness, just because he did testify, just because he now has a document they found that would give him corroboration, independent, that probably isn't enough. But that with this new other witness that could show he was being molested by the same person around the same time frame, that's pretty important information a jury should hear.
Yeah. By the way, Erlinda from Tina, who is scolding the chat, do people not know the difference between murder and manslaughter? What is the difference? Does it vary from state to state, Erlinda?
I think it varies from state to state, but essentially murder, you need some malice aforethought. You need some intentional act that these were premeditated. Manslaughter, and that's the instruction that was rejected during the second trial, was essentially that they acted with a belief, albeit maybe unreasonable, of some impending peril, imminent peril. And so if the jury believed that, they killed their parents because they had this fear, this impending fear of imminent peril, then it would bring it down to a manslaughter as opposed to murder, which is what they were convicted of, essentially premeditated murder with malice.
Dr. Ann, back to you on this, because I think we only answered the first part of the question last time. Joel, don't forget to let Ann answer the question why they killed the mother. And here's a comment.
Sure.
Yeah, go ahead, Ann.
Well, first of all, they tried to get the mother, when they were working on this, their anxiety and fear, to go with them to the East Coast. Lyle would go back to the university. He was, I think, at Princeton. And she refused, and they realized that nothing was going to change her mind. The other, I thought, a very important thing is there was a whole week of real serious issues that came up. And one was the fact that confrontation between the mother and Lyle, in which it came out that she knew about the abuse going on and did nothing. So that factor of not protecting her sons I think was a huge issue. So there are other things, but those certainly were the two. And that was a scene where she grabs at his hair and realizes, it was a really down and serious fight that they had. And
do you waste your time with Netflix? You seem too smart for that, but did you watch the Menendez series called Monsters on Netflix?
I did not watch that. No, you're right. I don't have time.
Yeah, it's funny, but someone made a interesting comment. Was that title intended for the brothers, which I just assumed, or for the parents? So I guess you can take it. Yeah, either way you see it, I guess the way you can take it. Ned Smith here. What is Carm's opinion of this? That, of course, is my mom, who's also a licensed therapist. I spoke to her actually. She says she thinks it's time for them to be released. She thinks that they were probably rehabilitated, and also believes in this SA, these allegations of SA. She believes that it probably they were victims of this and suffered as a result. She does not endorse murder of any kind, just to be clear on that. But and what about, I'm curious, and this is how the show, not the movie, but the docuseries Monsters open up, is a young Lyle and Erik walking into that Beverly Hills mansion, each getting a shotgun out of the trunk. And for lack of a better term, just blasting them. Someone earlier in the chat said the autopsy pictures are horrific, which I would never look at, by the way. But what about the sort of the overkill here? Does that play to the rage factor, the anger at the parents? Can you read anything into that?
I don't know if I would read anything into it, but don't forget they, as I understood it, they never had fired a gun prior to that. They even had to go and get lessons in that. And they picked the wrong guns for one thing and the wrong ammunition. And part of it could be that they hadn't practiced enough and they just kept pulling the trigger kind of thing. That was one theory that came out, but it certainly was the idea that they felt that if the information ever came out, the abuse ever came out, it would push Jose into doing something that they really feared. So that was their answer to try to, I think you said it very well, the imperfect defense is it doesn't sound logical to us, but it did to them at that particular point in time.
But you know, it's a double-edged sword. You're saying they're going out there practicing shooting guns because they've never done it before. That goes to intent. That goes to premeditated. And getting the guns and hiding the guns. That's premeditation, right? It's not like they grabbed his shotgun out of the closet because dad was coming in here to kill him and rape him again, right?
Well, you're correct. But the fact is that they could think of no other way.
I understand that. Yeah.
You know, to deal with it.
I'm just giving you the other side.
Oh, yeah. Oh, thank you. I need to.
Well, I can stir it up for you, Ann.
Ida Shaw JD here. Why so cynical, Joel? Gascon may be doing this out of the goodness of his heart and in the interest of justice. I'm a little cynical with politicians. I'm not going to lie. There's no ignoring that. But maybe, I don't know, maybe he is doing it out of the goodness of his heart. One of the things that I am curious about, having seen Shawshank Redemption, I am not nearly as sophisticated as Anne, so I waste my time on a lot of garbage, although that was a phenomenal movie. To you, Erlinda, I mean, you deal with the criminal element fairly often. How do you think these brothers, if they were to be released from prison, how would adjustment to life on the outside be for them, do you think?
I think that they would probably be released with some sort of supervision. So they can transition back into society. I agree. I think that they're probably rehabilitated. They're 53 and 55 or 56, I think now. And I don't think that they'll have a problem. I think they're both married. Didn't they marry while in prison? And so I think that's why we have programs and we have halfway houses in place so that these resources are available for these people to transition back into society. And, you know, going back, Joel, I think Gascon, I honestly would like to think, I mean, people do have a good heart. Some people do. And didn't he run on wanting to be basically a very fair and just prosecutor, which frankly, we need more of these days. We really need fair and just prosecutors. And maybe he really is thinking, I think my prosecutors on the second go around, you know, just were a little too aggressive. And so maybe he is trying to right some wrongs. We're not saying they didn't kill the parents, that they didn't deserve to serve time, but 35 years after all the abuse that they suffered that now appears to have been substantiated, maybe it's time to give this a second look.
On a totally different note, but everyone keeps saying, hey, is that the woman from the Alec Baldwin trial? Yes, it is. How did you get involved? How did you become special prosecutor? And how did you get uninvolved in what was one of the craziest things I've ever seen, with the prosecutor being cross-examined by the defense? Tell us, a little bit about that.
Just briefly. So I've been an attorney in the New Mexico, Albuquerque area for 29 years. I was a state and federal prosecutor for over 11 years. And then I went into private practice doing just criminal defense. And that's what I've been doing for the last 16, 17 years now, and over 17 years. And so I was called one day after I finished the trial in federal court and asked, would you be willing to be co-counsel with Carrie Morrissey on the Alec Baldwin as a special prosecutor and on the Alec Baldwin case? And I thought, well, let me think about it. And I thought, it's kind of going back to my roots. I started as a prosecutor, and I think it would be a nice change because I've been doing criminal defense for so long. And so I agreed. And then it became very clear that my co-counsel, I think, has some, I'll be nice. I'll just say maybe some mental health issues. I don't know. But it just became it was very contentious from the beginning. And so I had not actually been with her in the same room until we were in trial, because we did a lot of stuff over Zoom and by phone. And it was very, very difficult that first week. And then when I learned that she didn't disclose some evidence, which she should have, and in the end, it probably was evidence that to the jury, it may not have mattered, but the issue was she should have disclosed it to the defense. And this goes back to my battle pony now, that prosecutors need to be completely above board and disclose. It doesn't matter what, just disclose it and let's fight it out in the courtroom. And I recommended to her that we should dismiss the case because, look, it's, this is a Brady violation. I see it as a Brady violation. I think this is a problem. I don't think we should go forward. She really wanted to be out there because she was, I think, very enamored with the media attention, and put herself on the stand. But before that happened, I said, I can't do this. I have to withdraw. This is not what I believe in. This is not what I signed up for. So I moved to withdraw, and the rest is history. I walked out. I even left my computer.
Yeah, you look like a superhero. Kudos to you for, again, knowing the difference between right and wrong. I assume you guys don't go to dinner or lunch too often together.
No, not at all. Not at all.
From NJ Cool Chick 67, keep the questions coming. You got the woman here who interviewed Eric Menendez. And was there anything Eric said that you found especially eye-opening or telling about what had been done to him and Lyle?
Yes, I certainly did. One of the things I had him do, which I still have, is to sketch for me, because we had 50 hours and I wanted to try to get as much information as possible. I had him sketch. He only had to do one, but he went on and on and on, and actually gave me, I think, 14 separate frames of what had happened in that week leading up to the shootings. And that became really important because I could keep going back over it. Now tell me about this, and what did you say here? One of the interesting things is many of the frames of these frames that he drew Eric took place in his bedroom. I thought that was really quite interesting, when they had this big house and they could have used a den, or they could have used, any kind of different, but they were in his bedroom. And he would draw himself, and he would draw stick figures, and would draw the father. And then he would put in one of those little circles what was said. So there was a lot of interaction and verbal memory that he had for that. And I found much of that, especially going through the whole week, very, very important, and tried to bring that into my testimony, which I certainly did believe that they had been abused.
Yeah. And let me ask you a follow-up there. I mean, drawing, how is it different than just speaking and asking questions? What kind of dynamic is it to have someone, or what purpose is it in terms of having them draw as opposed to speaking?
Well, of course, you don't know how they're going to draw. Some wouldn't do it. But for Eric, he was able to put so much writing in there that we could go back and look at each little sentence that he did, so that you can revisit it. As I said, having 50 hours, I really wanted to say he had his father there, and we would then talk about what it was like growing up with him. So I could use these 14, whatever they were, frames to pull his memory back. And it was good for him too, I think, to be able to do that. And then I had our therapist take a look at it. I'm not one, so I wanted to see what her impression would be. And then we also have looked at it from a later, not at that time, but have looked at it through machine learning and topic modeling to see whether there was anything that I maybe had missed.
Do you teach about the Menendez brothers in your classes at BC?
I do. Yes.
You do. Interesting. Phantom 6000, again, a friend of mine, friend of the show. This is addressing Ida Shaw JD. If you're still watching, over 20 of George Gascon's prosecutors are suing him for not following his social experiment agenda. City has paid out millions because of it. He disbanded the victims' families' rights division. Please, wow. With a shaking the head emoji. Yeah, that's doesn't sound like it's out of the goodness of his heart that he might be doing this, which is, as Black Widow says, horrendous. So let's take a listen now. This is Joan. This is the sister of the woman who was murdered. This is Kitty Menendez's sister, biological sister. Let's take a listen.
Not very much face to face. Not even mine, yes. Okay. Okay. Please know that I'm nervous.
She's wonderful.
Yeah. There's certain people I don't interrupt, and I wouldn't stop that sound. She is the star of the show, very compelling. And your reaction to just watching and listening to her.
Oh, I think it's very moving. I think that she was able to do that. Speaks volumes to her. I had not heard the family. I know that the family, John Conte and some of us did talk with family back when we were interviewing. But for her to come out and say that, I think was very, very powerful.
Tim Jansen, to you, from Steve Nick, not to be confused with Stevie Nicks. What about the idea that the brothers are irreparably damaged, both from the abuse and by what they did? This is just more of a not a legal question, Tim, a psychological question. But would you be comfortable with them being your neighbors, knowing that they shot their parents 14 times? It brings up a good point. I mean, how do you know, Tim, if someone has been fully rehabilitated? I guess there's no real test for that, right?
Well, let's not jump the goose here. They're institutionalized, okay? They have been in prison 35 years. They have been institutionalized. In 2005, they lost their last appeal. That was a turning point. Do they become the criminal and know they're never getting out? Or do they do positive things and try to be positive role model? That's what they did, apparently. No one knows for sure what they'll do when they get out, if they get out, but they're going to have a support system. They had no previous criminal behavior that I know before that. And I think if they got out, I think they would probably never kill anybody again. They may never commit another crime. I wanted to go back because I didn't get to say this about Erlinda. The reason Erlinda did what she did in her case is because she was on the other side. She was a defense lawyer, not a prosecutor. Prosecutors don't even know what Brady is. Nevertheless, abide by it. Every day I have to explain Brady to them. Something that's favorable or exculpatory or impeachment towards your witness. You have to turn that over. And the fact that you did that probably is why the other prosecutor was upset. And I commend you. I commended you when you did it. Sometimes doing the right thing isn't always the easiest, right?
Oh, it was hard.
And when we've seen that in murder trials, right? Not taking a case because you have a conflict. And prosecutors have motives too, right? That was a big case, a lot of publicity. She wanted to make a name for herself. She wasn't going to turn that down just because some little thing called Brady, you know. And I commend her, and I wish, and I'm hoping the prosecutors now realize seeking justice is not seeking convictions; it's seeking the truth, right? That's what it's supposed to be about.
That's exactly right. Thank you. Thanks, Tim.
Yeah, from Becky England here. Not a question, but an answer for being a victim of SA. And thank you for sharing, Becky. Drawing is sometimes the only way to communicate. I was made to be terrified to speak about what happened, which makes a lot of sense to me, as I would be arrested for lying. So that manipulation obviously has a huge effect by the predators on their prey here. Erlinda, one of the other questions I'm curious about, and I'm wondering if you have any insight, is profiting. The Menendezes are, they're big names. I don't want to call them celebrities, but pretty much everybody knows who they are. Would they be allowed to profit if they were released from prison? Books, movie deals? Tim shaking his head no. What do you say, Erlinda?
I agree with Tim. I don't think they would be. Isn't there? And I don't want to speak for California law that I haven't researched, but I don't think that they would be allowed to profit. And just briefly going back to that previous question about would you want them to be your neighbors? I think that from what I read recently, Eric counsels other prisoners at the prison. And so I think that they're rehabilitated. I mean, we will never know, but I don't think that they would be able to profit. I mean, Tim, what do you think? I don't think that they could.
Unless you're a serial murderer or you're a pedophile, those people repeat and kill people. A lot of times people kill somebody for one reason, and it's probably the only time they're ever going to be put in that circumstance that they do it. So they're probably the least probably going to commit the same offense twice.
What's interesting is everyone's got an opinion on this. Lexi here, my heart goes out that they were abused, but they had such a brutal murder. I cannot get past that. And the way they behaved after, I don't think life in prison is too harsh. And, you're asked about that often, too. They went on this crazy spending spree, and a lot of people said, look, these are just materialistic little brats. What is the response to that?
Well, you have to look at what they spent it on. I remember, I think Eric had bought 3 Rolex watches, gave them all away, though that it was nothing that he profited from. I think Lyle bought a restaurant that didn't make it. So you want to take a look at that. It's not that they didn't have the money before. I always go back to the fact that the uncle was the estate manager, and he had to approve any spending. And so I felt that was some kind of a ability to see what was going on, that he evidently approved it. So I think that's I really have to look at what they spent it on, why they spent it, and the other factors, what they had done, weighed heavily on them. I know Eric became suicidal. That was the reason that he went to for some counseling, and you would have to think about that, and that they certainly suffered in their own way for what they did. Eric always said if he could take that 7 seconds back, he would.
Yeah. I want to get back to you on Dr. O'Neill. He's a therapist that's been in a big part of this conversation since this happened. But first, a little marital advice from Erlinda. I know you're not a marriage therapist, Erlinda, but a lot of people are asking. Both brothers are married. They've been behind bars for 35 years. What do you think happens to these marriages if they're released? I mean, you've dealt with other defendants. I don't know that they've been away for that long, but I mean, what happens? Do they move in together? I mean, it's a whole different dynamic now.
I've seen in my 29 years, especially as a criminal defense lawyer, I've seen a lot of marriages fall apart when the spouse or the boyfriend or the fiance is arrested, and then they find new love interest or romantic interest while they're in jail. I think it's going to be difficult. I hate to be rain on their love parade, but I'm not sure that they would be, unless you have really understanding spouses. I think it would be really hard, and maybe this might be a question better posed to Dr. Burgess, but just given the dynamics, you have a relationship that started in prison. been in, for, I think one of them got married in 2003. So for the last 21 years.
Yeah. Eric was married in 99, I believe. So it's even longer.
Wow.
Okay. So I think it's going to be challenging. I can't imagine. It might survive, but.
And
Right.
how long have you been married, Anne? Her husband is so cool, by the way, Alan. But how many years have you been married?
I'm going to go back to how would they survive? The marriage would survive, and you're not going to know. I mean, that's a long one that Eric is involved with. I think Lyle has been married twice, married, divorced, and then remarried somebody else. So. A lot's going to depend on how much support they get. Looks like the family, that's really wonderful that the family is going to be there to support. And with the partners, time will tell. That might be something we're talking about if they get released.
Anne doesn't want. She's been married a long time. Trust me, and he's a very cool guy. I met him, and very smart. Shockingly. Also a doctor. Dr. Ann, was there any truth to the rumor that Eric and Lyle were forced to perform essay on each other by their father? There is a scene in this Netflix docuseries where they are with each other, for lack of a better phrase. But what about this?
Yeah, and that would not be unusual. First of all, that if the father is showing some kind of behavior to the brothers, and then the brothers, it's what we call reenactment. We certainly see this. Not quite often, but it would not be unusual that happened.
Yeah. Another one for Anne real quick. We talked about this last night. We're talking about wives. What is it about women who get attracted to the Scott Petersons, the Lyle and Erik Menendezes,
Ted
the
Bundy
BTK serial killer, the Ted Bundys? What is going on psychologically here? I wouldn't commit crimes to get women, but it's interesting that they do get women. I'm married now, but what is it, Anne?
Well, right after they were, and while they were in jail, they got a lot of mail. They got a lot of fan mail, I guess is what you'd call it. So they were getting plenty of that type of reaction. So that it doesn't surprise me that they each picked one to partner with. But there is a phenomenon of being with the bad guy. I know somebody has written on this and has done some research on it, and there is the identification with that is something that some women seem to want and do, because all of the serial killers, I have a PowerPoint just on all of the serial killers that have been married while they're in prison. So, and there's about 20 of them, and that's only once one of my students did that. So there is there's an attraction there, that's for sure. It doesn't tell you about, you'd have to talk with the women to see what it is specifically, but I know it does happen. It's a phenomenon.
Yeah. This, by the way, is a very divisive case right next to each other. Lorraine, amazing. The entitlement continues. The implication is that they will be let out and they're entitled. And then you've got this right here, free the Menendez brothers, pretty much back to back. Then you've got this that everyone's got to agree with. Dr. Burgess is a celestial being on earth. Love her, respect. There you go. So back to Erlinda. And Erlinda, sorry for putting you on the spot here, but Marcy's law. Yeah, Marcy's law was invoked a few times today. It's a California law that also exists, I think, in Florida. I don't know if it does in New Mexico. Are you familiar with it, Erlinda?
I have to say I'm not.
Oh, so Tim Jansen, we will come right back to you, Erlinda. And by the way, I'm going to go about 7-8 more minutes, and then we are going to wrap the show, and then we're going to do Charlie Adelson because there's breaking news there. So, Tim, just explain Marcy's law once again to those who were not here earlier.
So prior to Marcy's law becoming law in Florida, the victims sometimes were not contacted. Plea agreements were done, sentencings were done, and the victim was never told. And so they passed a law, and now victims have to be talked to. They have to be considered. And if there's a victim crime, the judge gives them they can speak, they can object to a plea offer, and they have a right to present testimony or a statement to the court. And they have to be notified of any plea agreements that are given, especially in victim crimes like sexual battery, domestic battery. So it gives them some rights, right? It's also, I mean, it's good, but it has it's got a downfall, right, Dr. Burgess?
Yes.
When the victim's family is the victim, you have a problem. One brother kills a sister and the victim say, we don't want him prosecuted. We're the family. That breaks the whole system down. It doesn't take that into account. And so really, who's the victim here? Is it the family who are still alive, or the family member that was murdered? So sometimes the state does not have to agree. In Florida, they do not have to agree what the victim wants, but they have to at least talk and consult with them.
So we have the Victims' Rights Act. That's what we have,
Yeah.
right? So
Yeah.
I agree with Tim.
Yeah. So the states do have. Go ahead, Ann.
No, I'd just like to follow up. There is that phenomenon of divided loyalty. And that's what I think what is so impressive with seeing the news conference with the family came together, because they have managed to get together. They're not divided. And any family that has one on one side, one on the other, they have to deal with it. I think they're a good example of how they have had to work it out.
You know, they had an interview 7 years ago. These same people, Joan was there with the other family members. They were asking for them to be released then.
Yeah.
And so it's not a Johnny come lately to these people. And Joan, I don't know if she wrote that, but she sure was very strong in that statement. And it wasn't like she was just reading it, right? You can tell when someone's reading. She knew the words and she understood. And so it's very impressive.
Yeah. Or Linda, what about, I mean, we talked about setting a precedent, but I'm curious, the Menendez brothers are really celebrities. You know, they've got documentaries being made about, there's 2 right now on Netflix, a gazillion Datelines, Nightlines, 2020s have been done about them. But what about the indigent, person sitting in a prison in New Mexico who went through the same thing, who's not being looked at all because that person is not famous and in the news? It seems unfair.
It is. And I think that's a problem with our criminal justice system. And I've always said this, we have the best criminal justice system, I think, in the world, but it's not without its problems. And the same goes for making a decision. For example, my experience with the Alec Baldwin case, I think it worked the other way, that we had a special prosecutor that, in my opinion, really wanted to go after the celebrity because of his celebrity status, and lost sight of the fact that we needed to focus on the evidence. And I think that's what our system, somebody posted earlier, Lady Justice isn't blind. And I hate to admit that, but I agree. I don't think Lady Justice is truly blind. I think that we need to look at every case, regardless of who the defendant is, whether it's former President Donald Trump, whether it's Alec Baldwin, whether it's Lyle and Erik Menendez, or whether it's John Smith, an indigent defendant sitting in a prison in New Mexico, who needs and deserves his case to be looked at. And I think we need to do better. Those of us who work in the criminal justice system and our lawmakers, and the people who appoint judges, and the people who vote for judges, I think we need to take a step back and really look at what's happening in our system. I mean, our system will only be as good as the people who are working in it.
Very well said. A couple of quick questions for Dr. Ann, and then we'll get final thoughts. And Dr. Oziel, I mentioned him earlier. He had a mistress. Her name was Judalyn Smith. Eric confesses to him. She tips off police. How did this impact the case? And he's still practicing, by the way, in New Mexico, or Linda. That's where he is.
What? I read that. Oh my God! I
He lost his life.
Many clients there.
Wow.
Yeah. So be careful, Orlinda. But Dr. Ann, what kind of impact did this have on the case overall?
Well, this brought the case out. This is what happened. Yes, that Eric was seeing the doctor because he was so depressed and felt so guilty over what he did. And Oziel got worried that maybe he was going to be in danger. So he gets Judalyn to sit outside, and she hears all of this going on. And so so much for what HIPAA wasn't in play back then, I guess, but the whole confidentiality issue was blown away. But it certainly impacted it. You have to think, what if that hadn't happened? You might have had, it might not have come forward. The case, to some degree, had gone cold. They had tried a number of motives and weren't able to. So that's what I would say is what could have been.
By the way, someone here is saying, I think Eric does feel remorse, but unsure of Lyle. I mean, Lyle's the older brother, 56 now, Eric 53, 18 and 21 at the times the crimes were committed. Interesting question. So I lied. I'll ask this question, one more for Ann, then we'll get final thoughts. Or Linda, how would you represent the brothers in this phase if you would at all?
I think that what Mark Garagos and the other attorneys are doing is what I would do. I mean, first, because I think that the only real way to get relief, now we've got the court of public opinion advocating for their release. I think that getting the DA on board and having the DA make that decision under the penal code that I cited earlier is really the only way that they're going to be able to get. Now, the Menudo Singer may be, as Tim said earlier, an angle on the new evidence that has come to light since this whole case, since their appeals were exhausted in 2005. I think I would first try to go to the prosecution and really present and make a compelling case, especially if you've got a prosecutor. And I know that we have some cynics here in the audience that, don't think he's Gascon is going to do the right thing, but maybe he will and take a real close look at this. And if that doesn't work, then let's file our motion. Let the court decide. Maybe we have a judge who will be willing to hear what this new evidence is. That's really what all you can do, I think.
Yeah. So I just want to quickly commend the COE, who's actually with CARM as we speak. Space Coast on the West Coast. Steve Cohen, who's the reason we have the best guests in true crime. Steve Cohen books them all. And obviously the 5 or 6, I'm sorry, I think it's 6 amazing mods that we have. I know that I'm kind of killing all of us, figuratively speaking, but just been a crazy amount of news. And we are going to cover Charlie Adelson in just a moment. And someone wanted to know, they said you held up unbelievably well under cross-examination. And by the way, another big factor in this was they convicted them right after the O.J. Simpson trial, where there's a lot of pressure to get a conviction. So there's that aspect. But what was it like under cross-examination? And just, give us a feel of how big this trial was back then. It was on court TV.
It was on court TV, yes. And you had the 2 juries. Sometimes you were with both juries. Sometimes you were with one. I mean, there was a lot going on. And certainly it was intense. All I can say, it was intense on the cross-exam and not on the direct. I mean, thank heavens it was direct first, so you could kind of calm down a bit. But, I had to wear my bulletproof vest. That's all I can say. Figuratively, because they really was, they were really shooting at me, that's for sure.
And she did it well, Dr. Ann Burgess. So huge thanks. R. Timothy Jansen, he's going to stick around with me. Tim, your final thoughts before we pivot over to Adelson.
Well, Ann, if you weren't making some good points, they wouldn't have been shooting at you. So that you dented their case. If they said no questions, you would have felt pretty low.
Oh, okay.
If they cross-examined you for a long time, they were worried. So kudos to you.
Okay.
This is a tragic case. It's tragic that they were victims of sexual abuse. It's tragic the way they had to take this and kill these people. You think that today, you would think that LA, this evidence would be admissible. You think a jury today probably would have found them guilty of manslaughter and they would be released. But you get back to the heinous way this crime was committed and their conduct afterwards. And so you got, I think it's 50-50 here, Ann, how people feel about them. But 35 years in prison is a long, long time. And I think everybody admits they were victims of sexual abuse. So Who knows what will happen?
Curious Charlie, interesting panel tonight. Truly the best guest in true crime. It is not a tagline. It is our reality. If you enjoy the content, please subscribe. Please hit the like button. We've got a Patreon page as well. And the best thing you can do is tell a friend about our show. She is that woman from the Alec Baldwin trial. Her name is Erlinda Ocampo Johnson. She is a highly experienced and successful criminal defense and personal injury attorney. As you heard, she was also a prosecutor. Erlinda, your final thoughts here, and I hope that you will come back as a guest on a different story.
I'd be happy to. Thank you. I think this is a tragic case. I think that is a very polarizing case because I think a lot of people do believe that they planned this out because you had the pre-planning, some of the stuff that happened before the killing. But what bothers me in reading a lot of the pleadings from the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals with the habeas petition matter was that the second trial, I don't think, was a fair trial. Evidence was excluded that should have been heard by the jury. The imperfect self-defense jury instruction should have been given to the jury. Let the jury decide. And I think that hopefully we have judges now who are more willing to really listen to this and these type of defenses. These things do happen. It's sad and it's tragic that we have this in our society, that this is happening to children. But I think that if the DA does the right thing, that they will go back before the judge and they get released. They serve the time that they would have overserved the time that they would have received had they been convicted of manslaughter.
Helen here saying crazy to have two juries, but that was indeed the case. There's not much more you can say about Dr. Ann Burgess other than she's been married a very long time. She's been a professor at Boston College for a very long time. She's an internationally recognized pioneer in the assessment and treatment of victims of trauma and abuse. She's the author of A Killer by Design. There is a Hulu series all about her that you must watch called Mastermind. And among her many awards, in 2016, she was named a living legend by the American Academy of Nursing. That was already 8 years ago that happened. Please have Erlinda on about Carrie Morrissey's motions. Maybe we'll do that. Dr. Ann, you get the final word on this.
Oh, well, so good to talk and to meet. I'm delighted to meet both Timothy and Erlinda and to hear your questions and to hear the news conference. I really appreciated that since I didn't hear it. And I see the family member. And I think that my point is that the family has come together over a very tragic situation. And if the families can do it, I don't see why other people can't do it. That would be my and why they couldn't come together. So be very interested to see what the outcome is for this from the district attorney.
We're all waiting to see. He said he was going to make a decision by the end of the month. The end of the month is in about 15 days from now, also known as Halloween. Happy Halloween to everybody. Grandma's been a member for 1 month. Tim, I just emailed you a link.
Okay.
So you'll have it. Tim and I are going to, as soon as I say an official goodbye, we're going to hop off of here. I think you're going to be redirected. And Dorothy Dici here, proud of you. Erlinda, thank you. And we will discuss Charlie Adelson. There's breaking news there. And I'll see if I can survive and make it to my bed at some point tonight. Love you all. Love you, America. Love you, Boston College, Boston, New Mexico, Tallahassee. And if you feel they should get out, I guess it's justice for the Menendez brothers. If you think they should stay in, I guess you don't want justice. So we will see. But appreciate you being here. And we will see you on the flip side talking Charlie Adelson. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.